The television flickered in the corner of Hank Delaney's modest living room, casting shadows across the cracked linoleum floor and the faded recliner where he sat, boots still on, grease-stained overalls rumpled from another long day under the hood of someone else's car. The air smelled faintly of motor oil and burnt coffee. Outside, the Idaho wind scraped dry branches against the trailer's aluminum siding, but inside, everything was still, until the voice on the TV pulled Hank upright. And joining us now is tech visionary Delia Knox, founder and CEO of Knox Space, the woman being called the next Elon Musk. The name didn't register at first. It was the face. Hank dropped his coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, hot liquid splashing across his work boots. But he didn't flinch. His eyes were locked on the screen. It was Lila, his daughter. Older now, sleeker, poised, dressed in a slate-gray designer suit with sharp shoulders and soft waves in her auburn hair. Her smile was polished, media-trained, her laugh rang out lightly at the interviewer's compliment, and her voice was crisp, refined, almost British. But it was her, his little girl. The same almond-shaped eyes, the same dimple in her left cheek when she smiled. He reached for the remote with a trembling hand and turned up the volume. Your story's remarkable, Delia. From the foster system to Forbes 30 under 30. Do you think growing up without parents shaped your ambition? Lila smiled warmly. Absolutely. I think not having a traditional family taught me to rely on myself. I had to build my own world, my own future, and I'm grateful for that. Hank stood there, mute, the blood draining from his face. No parents? Foster system? His mind spun. He remembered her tiny hands gripping his fingers when she was learning to walk. The lunches he packed. The lullabies he sang even when he was too tired to stand. The birthday cakes. Sloppily frosted but made with love. The scraped knees. The school plays. The late-night talks about stars and dreams. He had raised her alone after her mother Claire died of leukemia. Given everything, worked through winters without heat, missed rent to buy her books. How could she say he didn't exist? The interview moved on to tech ventures and IPOs. But Hank wasn't listening anymore. He stared at the woman on the screen, this stranger wearing his daughter's face. Something had gone terribly wrong. She didn't just fail to mention him, she'd erased him. His hands clenched at his sides, calloused and scarred from years of honest labor. He could take heartbreak. He'd taken plenty. But this felt like betrayal carved into his bones. He moved on instinct, grabbing his old army duffel from the closet and stuffing it with clean shirts, a pair of boots, and the photo album he kept under his bed. Faded pictures of Lila grinning with missing teeth, holding her first puppy, standing beside him in a backyard filled with dandelions. Proof that he had been there, that he hadn't imagined the life they shared. By nightfall, Hank was in his truck, engine rattling as he barreled down the state highway toward Boise, where the cheapest flight to California left at dawn. He didn't have much money, didn't have a plan. But he had questions, and she was going to answer them. He stared out the windshield as the miles blurred into darkness, heart pounding. Why did she say she was an orphan? Who taught her to forget him? And most of all, who had she become? The marble floors gleamed beneath Hank Delaney's boots as he stepped into the soaring glass atrium of Knox Space Global Headquarters. Everything smelled like money, filtered air, citrus polish, and the faintest trace of something metallic and cold. Hank had never felt more out of place. His denim jacket, sun-bleached and patched at the elbows, drew stares from the security guards and clipboard-carrying assistants, who floated through the pristine lobby like they were on rails. He didn't care. His eyes were locked on the towering LED display behind the reception desk. Delia Knox, CEO, her image rotating in slow motion, smiling confidently, shaking hands with world leaders, cutting ribbons on space-age laboratories. Lila, he whispered under his breath. His daughter had become a stranger. But that was going to change today. Sir? The receptionist asked, her tone edged with suspicion. Do you have an appointment? No, Hank said, his voice low but steady. But tell her Hank Delaney is here. Her father. The receptionist blinked. A beat passed. Then she forced a professional smile and typed something into her computer. "I'm sorry, but Ms. Knox doesn't take unscheduled personal meetings. She'll take this one." A hush fell over the lobby as security approached. Two men in tailored black suits with earpieces and practiced indifference. But then, movement. An elevator dinged. Heads turned. She stepped out. Lila. She was dressed in cream slacks and a silk blouse the color of pearls. She carried herself like someone who'd never tripped, never cried, never begged for anything in her life. For a split second, Hank forgot to breathe. She looked so much like Claire. "Lila," he said, stepping forward. Her eyes flicked toward him, then paused. Her head tilted slightly, the way it always had when she was trying to remember someone. Hank's chest thudded with hope. But then her brow furrowed, ever so slightly, and her lips curled into a polite, puzzled smile. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "It's me, baby," he said. "It's Dad." Her face didn't change. In fact, it grew colder. "Sir," she said sharply, "I don't know who you are, but I think you're mistaken." He laughed, confused. "Mistaken? You're my daughter, Lila Delaney. You used to wear rainbow socks and carry that ugly stuffed squirrel named Captain Chomp." "Security," she said, never looking away from Hank. "Please escort this man out of the building." No, Lila, wait. I raised you. After your mama died, it was just you and me. I still got the photo album. You had that scar on your knee from falling off the tire swing. Don't you remember the tire swing?" A flicker, something, flashed across her face. A shadow behind the eyes. Recognition? But it was gone as fast as it came. "I think you need help," she said softly, almost with pity. "I don't know you. I'm sorry." The guards grabbed him gently but firmly. Hank didn't resist. He just stared at her, mouth open, heartbreaking. As they pulled him toward the exit, she turned away without another word. Behind him, the LED display resumed its loop. Delia Knox, tech queen, smiling down at the world she'd built. And Hank, cheeks burning, vision blurred, was left wondering what kind of world would erase a father from his own daughter's mind. Had someone gotten to her? Or had she chosen to forget him? The motel room stank of mildew and loneliness. Hank sat on the edge of the unmade bed, staring blankly at the muted TV, where the same tech news segment from earlier was now looping on repeat. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't slept. The confrontation with Lila, or Delia as she called herself now, played over and over in his mind like a cruel joke on a scratched vinyl record. She'd looked through him like he was nothing, called him a stranger, accused him of abandonment. And yet, even through the humiliation and heartbreak, Hank couldn't shake the flicker in her eyes, just for a second, a crack in her polished veneer. A memory tugging at the corner of her mind. It had to mean something. Unable to sit still, he paced the threadbare carpet, grabbed his phone, and Googled her name again. Delia Knox. CEO. Innovator. Billionaire. One click led to another. Dozens of profiles, interviews, red carpet appearances, photos of her shaking hands with celebrities, tours of her office, her home, even a breathless lifestyle article titled, "Inside Delia Knox's Rise from Nothing." He clicked. The page loaded slowly on the motel's weak Wi-Fi. It was full of fluff. Her minimalist mansion, her favorite wines, her morning rituals. Then came a slideshow titled, "From Humble Beginnings to Billion-Dollar Breakthroughs." Hank's thumb hovered. The second image stopped him cold. It was a picture of her childhood bedroom. At least, that's what the caption said. A rare glimpse into the room Delia grew up in, meticulously recreated from memory as a reminder of where she came from. But Hank didn't need the caption. He knew that room. His knees buckled, and he sank to the mattress. The wallpaper, faded lavender with tiny gold stars, wasn't just similar. It was exactly what he and Lila had picked out when she was 6. He remembered climbing the ladder to hang it, cutting his hand on the scraper. She'd told him it made her room feel like space, She'd wanted to be an astronaut. The white metal bed frame with the squeaky joints, the unicorn lamp with the broken horn, the threadbare patchwork quilt Claire had made before she got sick, and on the shelf above the dresser, Captain Chomp, the stuffed squirrel with one button eye. She had said she didn't know him, but her Billionaire brand had reconstructed the bedroom he built with his own hands. How could she remember this? The aesthetics, the layout, the lamp, and not him. His head throbbed, his vision blurred. Was it a lie? A performance? Or was it possible her mind had been tampered with, memories selectively deleted? He scrolled down. The article credited the recreation to consultations with former caretakers and personal journaling. No mention of him. No trace. Fury boiled beneath the heartbreak. Someone had taken his daughter's truth and twisted it into a palatable narrative for the press. An orphan made good. A success story that erased the blood, sweat, and devotion of the man who'd actually raised her. Someone had rewritten her history, and now he had proof. Proof that she remembered more than she admitted. He closed the article and stood up, jaw tight, resolve hardening. This wasn't just about reunion anymore. It was about the truth, and whoever had stolen it. The school hadn't changed much. Faded playground equipment still creaked in the wind, and the red brick building stood hunched under a gray California sky, as if weighed down by its years. Hank leaned on the chain-link fence, staring at the classroom windows, each one like a portal to a time he remembered vividly, and one his daughter seemed determined to forget. He hadn't planned to come here, but after seeing the recreated bedroom online, he needed something tangible, someone who had known Lila before the lies took hold. Someone who could tell him he wasn't losing his mind. He approached the front office cautiously, removing his cap as he stepped inside. The receptionist, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes, looked up. "Can I help you?" "I hope so," Hank said, voice rough from fatigue. "I'm looking for someone who might remember my daughter, Lila Delaney. She was here about 15 years ago." The woman typed something into her system. "We don't keep detailed records that far back without a court request." "I'm not looking for records," he said. "Just a memory." She studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "You'll want Mrs. Finney. If anyone remembers, it's her." 10 minutes later, Hank sat across from a petite woman with sharp eyes and a floral blouse. Her office was cluttered with posters of multiplication tables and cartoon owls wearing graduation caps. A framed photo of her own children sat on her desk, smiling out at a younger world. "Lila Delaney," she said, frowning as she stirred her tea. "That's a name I haven't heard in a long time." "You remember her?" Hank asked, leaning forward. "I do," she said slowly. "Sweet girl, quiet, always reading, very bright, a little shy but polite, smart. She used to draw these amazing robots, way ahead of what you'd expect from a fourth grader." Hank smiled faintly. "Yeah, she was always sketching on napkins at the diner. Said she was going to build a space car one day." Mrs. Finney nodded. Then her expression darkened. She stopped coming to school rather suddenly. No warning. 1 week she was here, the next, gone. I remember because it upset the other kids, especially Emily, her best friend. There was no goodbye. Just a note in the faculty log, transferred out of district. No forwarding school, no parent meeting, just gone. "That's not what happened," Hank murmured. "She didn't transfer. She was taken." Mrs. Finney looked at him sharply. "I got sick," Hank continued, "had a bad fall, ended up in the hospital for a week. When I got home, Lila was gone. CPS said she'd been moved for her safety, but no one would tell me where. Said I was under investigation. I never hurt my daughter. Never." Finney was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes things go missing in the system, or they're made to disappear. Before Hank could press further, a movement caught his eye. Out the window, across the courtyard, a man. Watching them. Lean, dressed in black, standing just beyond the school fence. Sunglasses, even in the gloom. As soon as Hank met his gaze, the man turned and disappeared behind the hedges. "Do you know him?" Hank asked, standing. Mrs. Finney came to the window. "There's no pickup at this time of day. No one should be back there." A cold wind pushed against the window pane. Hank's gut twisted. This wasn't just a mystery now. Someone didn't want him asking questions. And someone was watching. The name had come from a note scribbled in the margins of an old CPS intake form, a document Hank wasn't supposed to see, but had managed to photograph when a distracted office clerk left a file drawer open too long. Sylvia Marsh, caseworker. It had taken days of calls and closed doors before someone finally let slip that she'd retired 2 years ago and moved to a small town north of Sacramento. A quiet place where people went to forget things. Hank drove there in a rusted rental car with one headlight out and a rattling dashboard that echoed the noise in his chest. He found her in a clapboard house at the edge of a dry field, her porch wind-chimed and worn, her flower beds bursting with red geraniums and overgrown mint. She answered in a housecoat and slippers, gray hair pulled back in a braid. At first, she mistook him for a census worker. When he said his name, Hank Delaney, her smile vanished. "I knew you'd come one day," she said quietly. Inside, the house smelled of tea and old paper. Sylvia moved slowly, her hands trembling just slightly as she poured chamomile into mismatched cups. Hank didn't touch his. He was staring at her like a man waiting for the end of a sentence that had lasted 18 years. "She was my daughter," he said. "Mine and Claire's. They said I abandoned her, but I never did. I was sick. No one would tell me where she went. And now she's grown, famous, and she doesn't remember me." Sylvia sank into her armchair, eyes glassy. "She doesn't remember because someone made sure of that." Hank's chest tightened. "Then you know what happened." She nodded, slow and heavy. "It wasn't supposed to go that way," Sylvia said. "Back then, you were just a name on a red flag report. The hospital submitted a temporary guardianship claim when no one came to pick her up. By the time I was assigned the file, she was already living with a temporary foster family. And then," Hank pressed. "I was told to fast-track her for adoption," she said. "There was pressure, unusual pressure. Calls from people above me, people I'd never spoken to before. One woman in particular, she worked for a private philanthropic foundation with ties to Silicon Valley. She said they'd found a perfect candidate, a girl with a good mind, no support system, and media potential. She had me," Hank snapped. Sylvia flinched but nodded. "I fought it at first. I did. I flagged the file. I tried to reopen the investigation. But someone kept wiping the trail. Emails disappeared. My supervisor was reassigned. I got a formal reprimand for, quote, procedural interference. After that, I kept my head down." "Who signed the adoption order?" he asked. She hesitated. "I did," she whispered. "They forged your death certificate, Hank. Said you died of sepsis. I knew something was wrong, but by the time I realized how deep it went, the papers were filed. And Lila was gone." Hank stood, fists clenched. "Do you remember the name of the woman from the foundation?" Sylvia nodded slowly. "Mira Alden. She was powerful, discreet. She vanished after the adoption, changed jobs, maybe changed names. But she was the one who took your daughter, and she made sure you couldn't find her." A silence settled in the room, thick and terrible. "Why?" Hank asked. "Why take her?" Sylvia looked at him with quiet sorrow. "Because someone saw more than a little girl. They saw a future brand, a genius to shape, a blank slate to build an empire on." Outside, the wind rustled the mint leaves, and Hank, eyes dark and burning, realized he wasn't chasing a reunion anymore. He was chasing a theft. Night had settled over the city like a thick, velvet curtain, muffling sounds and cloaking secrets in shadows. Hank Delaney crouched in the narrow alley behind the Knox Space Estate Management building, heart pounding, breath shallow in the cool air. The dull hum of streetlights buzzed overhead, distant traffic passing unnoticed. He wasn't a criminal. Never had been. But desperation had driven him here, to break into a place that held answers he couldn't find any other way. Earlier that day, after a long day of dead ends and closed doors, Hank had discovered a tip-off, buried deep in the threads of an anonymous forum dedicated to whistleblowers. A source claimed that Knoxspace's legal files contained hidden documents related to Lila's adoption and personal history, files heavily guarded and fiercely secret. Now armed with a forged employee badge he'd acquired from an unwitting temp worker earlier that week, Hank slipped through the back door that had been left carelessly ajar. Inside, the building smelled sterile, like new leather and cleaning solvents. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, interspersed with locked glass cases holding expensive, antique tech relics. Hank's fingers trembled as he moved to a corner office where the digital archives were stored. He booted up the terminal, fingers flying over the keyboard to bypass rudimentary security protocols. He didn't have the training, but years fixing cars and machines had taught him patience and problem-solving. The screen flickered, then settled on a folder marked, "Personal, Knox, Delia." He clicked it open, and his breath caught. File after file appeared. Birth certificates, adoption papers, medical records. But one folder stood out, restricted. His pulse quickened. He bypassed the warning, praying he wasn't about to get caught. Inside was a folder titled, Father Identity. He opened it. There it was, a death certificate. His name, Hank Delaney. His face, forged onto a grainy black and white photo with the word deceased, stamped across it in bold red letters. The cause of death. Sepsis. His heart thundered in his chest. Someone had faked it. Officially declared him dead years ago. And that wasn't all. There was a forged affidavit, signed by Sylvia Marsh, the caseworker, declaring Hank unable to care for Lila due to medical incapacity, with a note that the child had been placed in foster care and then adopted. A counterfeit adoption order followed, signed by a judge who had retired long ago. Every official stamp, every signature carefully forged. His eyes scanned further, and he found bank statements showing large, unexplained transfers into Knoxspace accounts around the time of the adoption, money that hadn't come from any public source. Suddenly, a noise shattered the quiet, the click of footsteps outside the door. Hank's hands shook as he unplugged the drive he'd used to copy the files. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" A security guard, flashlight cutting through the dark, spotted him immediately. Hank bolted for the back exit, heart hammering. The chase was on. Bursting into the alley, he heard the guard shout behind him. But Hank didn't look back. He had proof. Proof that Lila's entire past had been fabricated. That someone had erased him, not just from her life, but from existence. And now that proof could bring down everything. But first, he had to stay alive. The penthouse office of Knoxspace looked like a spaceship command center, all sleek glass, brushed steel, and glowing holographic displays. Lila, Delia Knox to the world, sat behind a massive desk, cool and composed, as Dominic Vance entered without knocking. Dominic was the kind of man who could wear a tailored suit and a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. His presence filled the room, not with warmth, but with calculated authority. He was more than a mentor. He was the architect behind Lila's empire, the unseen hand guiding every public move. "Another late night, Delia?" he asked, voice smooth, almost casual. Lila looked up, a flicker of exhaustion beneath her polished exterior. "The numbers are good. Better than expected. But the board wants more." Dominic leaned forward, resting his palms on the desk. "They want a story, not just numbers. Your story. The orphan who conquered Silicon Valley." Lila's jaw tightened. "I've told them what they want to hear." "Exactly," Dominic said, nodding slowly. "And that's why it works. But remember, perception is reality. Your past is a product. You're the product. And the world needs to believe, Lila's eyes flashed with something darker. Sometimes I wonder who I am beneath all the branding. Dominic smiled thinly. You are the brand. The product. And the product is perfect. Hank's discovery of forged documents and his shocking reappearance threatened to shatter that perfect image. Dominic knew that if the truth came out, that Lila was not an orphan, that her father was alive, and that her entire backstory was fabricated, it would destroy everything. But Dominic had played his cards carefully. Years ago, when Lila was still a frightened girl, he had found her, an orphan, or so the world believed. He'd seen her potential, her brilliance, and seized the opportunity. Quietly, he injected capital, crafted her public narrative, and guided her rise. She was his puppet, and he pulled the strings with precision. Today, Dominic had a new plan. He handed Lila a file. This is from the board. They want a fresh image, a clean break from the past. Your name change, the orphan story, it's all part of it. But we need to be ready if anyone digs up dirt. You're not the only one who remembers before the story began. Lila glanced at the file, lips pressed tight. Inside were background checks, intelligence reports on anyone who might threaten their empire, including Hank. He's a liability, Dominic said, and liabilities are expensive. Lila swallowed, the weight of years pressing down. What do you want me to do? Play the part, Dominic said. Deny him, discredit him, make him look like a delusional man trying to latch onto your success. Publicly, loudly. Lila hesitated. He's my father. Dominic's gaze sharpened. He's a threat. You're a CEO now, not a little girl. Family doesn't matter when the company is on the line. As Dominic turned to leave, Lila's mind raced. She remembered the nights alone, the vague shadows of memories she wasn't sure were hers, and the pressure to be someone she barely recognized. She was a puppet, but she was also a survivor. And somewhere deep inside, a flicker of rebellion sparked. Lila stood at the edge of the gravel driveway, staring at the small, weather-worn house nestled beneath a canopy of cottonwoods. The rental car behind her ticked quietly as the engine cooled. She had told no one where she was going, not her assistant, not the PR team, and certainly not Dominic. Especially not Dominic. She hadn't been here in nearly 2 decades. Yet every detail of the place felt like a whisper from a forgotten dream. The crooked mailbox half swallowed by weeds, the squeaky porch steps she instinctively avoided, the chipped wind chimes shaped like stars and moons. The air smelled like wildflowers and old wood, and beneath that, something else, something older, more personal. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but lately, pieces of herself had started to come loose. It began with that man, Hank Delaney, the way he'd looked at her in the lobby. The way her stomach had twisted when he said the word, Dad. And then there was the room. Her room. The one Dominic said had been recreated from imagination. But the layout, the wallpaper, even the stuffed squirrel on the shelf, it was all exactly right. Too perfect. Lila had begun to wonder, had she imagined Hank Delaney, or had someone made her forget him? She stepped through the door of the house, the old key still working, though the lock groaned in protest. Inside, dust coated every surface, and the air was thick with silence. She moved slowly through the narrow hallway, fingertips brushing the walls, past peeling wallpaper and faded family photos, some with faces deliberately missing. She entered the small bedroom at the back, and stopped. The wallpaper was lavender, patterned with tiny gold stars. The bed frame was white and rusted at the joints. A shelf still held a few scattered books, a cracked lava lamp, and a dusty music box shaped like a carousel. Her knees gave out and she sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling. She reached for the music box. It was cold, heavy. She wound it slowly. Click. Click, click. The carousel began to spin, and a soft, tinkling tune filled the room. Claire's lullaby. Her mother used to hum it when she was sick, curled beside her in the bed, whispering promises that everything would be okay. And suddenly, like a crack in a dam, the memories came rushing in. A tire swing in the backyard, her dad carrying her on his shoulders, the smell of motor oil and cinnamon toast. A voice calling her Bug, his nickname for her, the way he'd cried silently the day she lost her first tooth and asked if Mommy could still see her from heaven. Lila pressed a hand to her mouth, tears slipping down her cheeks. These weren't fantasy, they were real. He was real. She stayed like that for a long time, the carousel spinning, the tune fading into silence. When she finally stood, the sky had gone dim. Her phone buzzed. A message from Dominic. Need you at the office. Urgent. Press sniffing around your father. Time to shut this down. Lila stared at the message, fingers hovering. Dominic had told her she was crafted. A story. An image. That the past was irrelevant. But now she knew the past existed. And it had a name. Hank. Her father. And someone had stolen him from her. The handcuffs bit into Hank Delaney's wrists as two men in suits shoved him into the back of a black, unmarked car. They hadn't read him his rights. They hadn't given a reason. One minute he was walking out of a diner in Oakland, pie box in hand. And the next, 3 men in tailored jackets and mirrored glasses had surrounded him like a SWAT team. Careful, one muttered with a smirk. We don't want the media getting a shot of the kidnapper. Kidnapper? The car doors slammed shut and they peeled into traffic. Inside the small interrogation room hours later, Hank sat hunched over the metal table, wrists still cuffed, a smear of dried blood near his temple from the scuffle. A uniformed officer finally entered with a file under his arm and an unreadable expression. You've been named in a criminal complaint, the man said, tossing the file down. Corporate espionage, theft of private documents, cyber intrusion, and harassment. Hank blinked, stunned. What the hell are you talking about? I didn't steal anything. I copied my own daughter's records. That's not espionage. She says you're not her father, the officer replied coolly. In fact, she says she's never seen you before in her life. She's lying, Hank growled, slamming his cuffed fists against the table. Or, someone made her believe a lie. She's been manipulated. The officer didn't respond, just slid the file toward him. Inside was a series of surveillance photos. Grainy shots of Hank outside Lila's building, Hank arguing with a security guard, Hank in the back alley of the estate office. They painted a damning picture. A man obsessed, a man unstable, a man who had crossed too many lines. They set me up, Hank muttered, realization sinking in like poison. This is Dominic, he's behind it, he's been pulling the strings from the start. The officer raised an eyebrow. You mean Dominic Vance, CEO of Vance Technologies, the man who helped raise Ms. Knox's startup from the ground up? He created her, rewrote her past. He's got her believing I'm dead, and now he wants me gone. The officer remained silent. Then, without another word, he left the room. Hank was alone for hours. The lights buzzed overhead. The air conditioning blew cold and constant, meant to wear a man down. His mind raced through every step of his journey. The motel, the photo, the caseworker, the sealed documents. All of it now twisted into evidence against him. And then, just when he thought he'd be left to rot, the door opened. A man in a prison orange jumpsuit stepped in, flanked by 2 guards. Late 30s, nervous eyes, unshaven. He was escorted to the chair across from Hank. Name's Mason Price, the man said softly, nodding at the guards who didn't leave. Heard you're in here for tangling with Dominic Vance. Hank squinted. What's it to you? I used to work for him. Software lead. I wrote the AI that scrubbed Lila's past from public records. I flagged the adoption seals. They buried my warnings, and when I asked too many questions, I accidentally leaked proprietary code and landed here. Hank leaned in. I'm not the only one, Mason whispered. Lila's not the first. Vance finds people, orphans, runaways, foster kids, and builds brands around them. Then he owns everything they become. Why? Mason's smile was grim. Because it's easier to control an empire when the face of it believes they owe you everything. Hank's blood ran cold. Mason slid a scrap of paper across the table, smuggled in somehow, even under watch. Names, places. You want to bring him down? Start here. As the guards hauled Mason out, Hank clenched the list in his fist. Dominic thought he'd buried him. But Hank Delaney was just getting started. The auditorium pulsed with anticipation. It was the biggest event of the year, Knox Space Global Summit, a tech showcase turned media spectacle. CEOs, investors, journalists, and influencers filled the sleek, neon-lit hall. Giant screens flashed with images of innovation, satellites, drones, orbital laboratories, and at the center of it all, one name in bold chrome letters, Delia Knox. Backstage, Lila stared at her reflection. She looked perfect, flawless, impeccably styled, a media-trained smile that had won over investors and crushed skeptics. But behind her eyes, something was cracking. The music box, the wallpaper, the man with the kind eyes who'd called her Bug, the music still echoed in her head. She wasn't crazy. She hadn't imagined him. He was her father. And if Dominic had gone this far to erase Hank Delaney, what else had he lied about? Ready? Dominic's voice was smooth as ever, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Lila turned. Her voice was even, calm. Yes. But one thing first. What would you do if my father really was alive? He didn't flinch. Didn't blink. I'd protect everything we've built, whatever it takes. The lights on stage shifted. Time to shine, star, he said, then disappeared into the wings. Lila stepped out to thunderous applause. As the spotlight hit her, she felt her body fall into rhythm. Smile, wave, pace slowly across the stage. Behind her, the screen began its live stream broadcast to millions around the globe. She took a breath. The script was memorized. The first slides flickered to life. And then, everything stopped. The screens went black for a split second. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Then, a new image appeared. A grainy photo of a young girl hugging a man in overalls, standing beside a rusted truck. Lila and Hank. Gasps. Whispers. Then came the documents. A forged death certificate. A sealed adoption order. Financial transfers traced to Dominic Vance. The camera feed, still live, cut to the back of the auditorium. Hank Delaney stood in the aisle. He held up a folder in one hand, a small device in the other. His voice boomed through the speakers. My name is Hank Delaney. I raised that girl with everything I had. They told me she was taken for her safety. They told me she was gone, but I never stopped looking. Security scrambled toward him, but the audience blocked their path. Some filming, others shouting. This company was built on a lie. And the man behind it, Dominic Vance, manufactured her identity for profit. He didn't raise a visionary. He groomed one. He took my daughter, erased her past, and sold her future. The room exploded in noise. Lila's heart slammed in her chest. She turned toward the screen just as another image appeared, a DNA test. Match. Hank Delaney, biological father of Delia Knox. She stared at it, then at Hank. And for the first time in years, she remembered everything. She stepped forward. The crowd went silent as she reached the edge of the stage, eyes locked on her father. Then, a gunshot. Screams erupted. Hank stumbled. Chaos. Panic. Security shouted commands. Journalists ducked under seats. But Hank didn't fall. Behind him, Dominic Vance stood, gun in hand, face contorted with fury. Before he could fire again, 2 security guards tackled him to the ground. Lila leapt from the stage, rushing to Hank. He looked up at her, blood on his sleeve but smiling through the pain. "Hey, Bug." She collapsed into his arms, sobbing. I remember everything." The cameras were still rolling, and the world had just witnessed the fall of an empire built on lies, and the reunion of a father and daughter no one could erase again.